Good evening. My name is Mo Alethi, and I am Executive Director of the Institute of Politics and Public Service at the McCourt School of Public Policy, and we are thrilled to welcome you all here for tonight's conversation with millennial mayors. I want to begin by thanking our partners on this event, without whom none of this would be taking place. We're thrilled to be working with the Georgetown Global Cities Initiative and the School for Continuing Studies, as well as our great partners who we've worked with in the past and thrilled to be working with again, the U.S. Conference of Mayors. At the Institute of Politics and Public Service, or GU Politics as we call it, we try to do a couple of things. One, promote a sense of public service beyond maybe even just the traditional way people think about it. Two, explore ways to do politics and public service better than maybe how it's being done today. And three, really engage young people in the political and public service process. Tonight's event is a great way all three of those goals combine and collide. Tonight we're going to have a conversation with three mayors, three millennial mayors, who are on the front line every day. When you're a mayor, politics is, and they may disagree with me to some extent, it's not absent, but it can't be your focus. You've got to make things happen. You got to work with people from different points of view and different perspectives in different sectors. You got to get things done. And a lot of times, as we have seen in recent weeks, when politics here in Washington doesn't work so well, it's the mayors who have to deal with it on the ground. And so we are thrilled tonight to hear from three young, dynamic mayors who are making things happen in their cities, representing different sizes of cities, representing different political affiliations, but all with the same commitment to public service and getting things done in their communities. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. Conference of Mayors has been a tremendous partner of both GU Politics as well as SCS and the Global Cities Initiative. And there's one guy who makes the U.S. Conference of Mayors work. And if there's a common thread, as I was visiting with the mayors coming in tonight, they all said the same thing. When Tom Cochran asks us to do something, we do it. Tom Cochran has been with the U.S. Conference of Mayors for since 1969, I think is correct, and has been CEO and executive director for 30 years. This is a guy who understands public service and how cities work. I'm going to ask Tom to come up, and when he's done, we're going to invite Emily Russell, who's currently pursuing her master's degree in urban and regional planning, to formally introduce our moderator and our panelists. So without further ado, Tom, come on up.
Thank you. On behalf of the nation's mayors, we have approximately 300 mayors in the city. We start our 86th winter meeting tomorrow on behalf of the mayors of the nation. We are pleased to be here with the Institute, with Mo and with Sheila. Sheila and I work together with Global Parliament of Mayors and others, and the three mayors that you're going to hear from. Let me just say this. I've never had so much hope in America as I've had with this new crop of mayors that we have elected. We were at a sister school up in Cambridge with the institute up there named after President Kennedy. We have the new mayor sessions there. And so many millennials, so many young women. And in the evening, we went around the room and we said, why did you run for mayor? And they didn't say, I'm a business guy, I'm going to come straighten it out, I'm going to do this. They said, because there's divisiveness in our nation, and we want to bring things together at the local level. So, as Mayor LaGuardia said, there's not a partisan way to do a pothole. You got to fill it up every day. And I believe that if you're students of public service, look at the cities, look at the local level, and watch these mayors. You're looking at the future of America. I do believe it. So with that, representing the last bastion of bipartisanship, I think, left in this nation. I'm pleased to be here to welcome you to this event, and thank you very much. And I am supposed to segue and call on Emily Russell, who will take over. Thank you, Emily.
Welcome, everyone, to this special event hosted by the Georgetown Global Cities Initiative and the Institute of Politics and Public Service at Georgetown's McCourt School of Public Policy, in partnership with the United States Conference of Mayors. I am honored to share the stage soon with mayors who will discuss their approaches to making a mark in local government and their strategies for changing the way cities are being run. My name is Emily, as mentioned. I'm a third-year master's student in Georgetown's Urban and Regional Planning program. I'm honored to introduce this distinguished panel of millennial mayors. Mayor Pete Buttigieg is the chief executive of the city of South Bend, Indiana. He was elected at the age of 29, America's youngest mayor of a city with over 100,000 residents, and was sworn into office on January 1st, 2012. Mayor Buttigieg is working to strengthen the local economy of South Bend while managing a cutting-edge and transparent city administration focused on improving neighborhood quality of life and using proven methods to enhance public safety. Mayor Lydia Mihalik is the 55th mayor of Findlay, Ohio. She assumed office as the first female mayor of Findlay, also on January 1st, 2012. Since taking office, Mayor Mihalik has given special attention to issues of flood mitigation, job creation, and improving the way the city of Findlay delivers services to its residents. She has been a strong proponent of the Small Business Development Center, which acts as a resource center for those wishing to start a business. Mayor Francis Suarez serves the city of Miami, Florida. He was elected on November 7th, 2017, and was sworn in on November 15, 2017. As mayor, he is working to raise the standards of the community where he was born and raised. He currently also serves as vice chair of the Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization and as president of the Miami-Dade County League of Cities. Mayor Suarez is dedicated to elevating the quality of life of Miami residents by focusing on transportation and connectivity issues within the city and beyond, nurturing the growth of a tech-based economy in the area, and by extension, job creation and international opportunities with Latin America. I am also honored to introduce our moderator for tonight's panel. Sheila R. Foster is a professor of law and public policy at Georgetown University. Over the last 2 decades, Professor Foster has worked with state, federal, and local agencies on environmental policy. Her most recent work explores the emerging concept of the urban commons and related property, land use, and urban governance issues at the local and metropolitan level. Professor Foster has taught and conducted research internationally in Africa, Switzerland, Italy, France, England, Austria, Colombia, Panama, and Cuba. As we hear from this distinguished panel, I'll remind everyone in the room and those watching on the live stream that you can tag @GUPolitics in your related social media posts. And for those in attendance, please stick around after the event for a reception immediately following the panel discussion. Thank you. Welcome, mayors.
Can we just step up? Is that yes, okay? We can just step up. Okay. Great, thank you. I'll sit here if you can. Great. So welcome, everyone, and thank you so much. I know that you've just arrived for the meeting that starts tomorrow, and this is your first stop. We're so privileged to have you here tonight. So we heard from Tom Cochran that this generation of mayors gives all of us, and him in particular, a lot of hope. And we build this as a millennial mayor panel. So I have to start with this question about the millennial generation. You are all millennials, and much has been said about your generation. I won't summarize here. And we'll focus on the positive. But what is it about your experiences that shape your approach to governing and to being a mayor? What is it about your experiences as a millennial that shapes your approach?
See people looking at me like I'm the grizzled old
You're the
timer, which
youngest.
I guess happens once you've been around for not that long as a mayor, because mayor time moves quickly. First of all, I really appreciate the chance to be here. My own formation was very much affected by an Institute of Politics when I was in college, and always an honor to be in the company of Tom Cochran and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So, when I ran for mayor, I didn't set out to be the young mayor or the millennial mayor. I really just wanted to be a good mayor, and it was a time when our city, South Bend, was really at a crossroads in terms of what kind of city we wanted to be. I think a lot of folks who haven't been might assume that we're a kind of homogenous, tidy college town. The reality, we're certainly proud of our colleges and universities, but South Bend was an industry town. We grew up around Studebaker when Studebaker was making cars. And by the time I ran for mayor, actually the same month I got into the race, Newsweek had published an article on 10 American dying cities, and we were one of them. And even now, we have on one hand some amazing things that it's my job to cheerlead for. And at the same time, at the time I was getting ready to take office, our unemployment rate was double digits. And to this day, we have a poverty rate that's higher than Baltimore. So just to give you a sense of the challenge we faced as a city. Where I think it made a difference that I was a young candidate was that running for any office is an act of hope. It's only something you do if you have hope for the future and if you believe that it makes a difference that you get into the mix. And so by running at that age, I think it was a chance to send a message, especially to older voters in the community who had absorbed this narrative that our city ought to be down on itself and was always licking our wounds ever since Studebaker stopped making cars in the early 1960s. That just because something like Studebaker wasn't coming back didn't mean that our city wasn't coming back. Then what happens very quickly is that your generation does become part of the story and your face becomes the message. You're going to be the candidate of technology, innovation, new ideas. Even if you don't like technology, you don't have any new ideas. People will still read that into you, right? And so by electing me, the community had kind of issued a mandate for change, which then gave me some wiggle room in trying to really reshape some of the processes and the norms of how our city was run and try to pull it onto a more modern footing. I think each of us brings personal experience, and the generational background is just part of that to the job. But those are some of the factors that I think made it somewhat significant that somebody my age was running.
And so you mentioned, and I wonder if one of you could address this, the draw to serve, right? To bring hope, to bring a new perspective. You're young, you're of this generation, you can do things differently. How much did that shape your decision to run?
When I graduated college from the University of Findlay, the local institution, private institution that I attended, I graduated with a degree in political science, and immediately I got a full-time job offered to me through an internship that I had with the mayor of the city of Findlay prior to graduation. And he said, hey, I'd love for you to come and work for us. And at that time, I actually was working in community and economic development. And so I was a tried and true, young, energetic person, right out of college, ready to change the world and impart my type of experience or lack thereof into a place that was kind of stale, really wasn't used to having a younger crowd around. And so I worked for 10 years in local government before I wanted to do more. And I think, politics and governing is kind of a vehicle, from my perspective, that I've used to serve the public. I grew up in a really small town just south of South Bend in Indiana. And so I'd never been in a really large city. Of course, our community is around 40,000 people, which seemed absolutely massive to me. But I really wasn't sure what local government did and what does a mayor do and who are all the pieces and parts of that particular team that help make things happen every day. And the thing that was most profound for me was the impact that we had on our citizens, whether it was, plowing a street, fixing a stoplight, or a pothole. I didn't know that really existed. And so as I started to see things evolve in my career and I got to experience, I went through this process where I thought, we can do so much better than what we're doing now. And so really my entrance into deciding to run for mayor was just out of, we needed a change. We were sleepy, we were stagnant. The economy had a big piece to do with that. And so I think you get involved in it, you really are someone who feels as though, hey, we've never had a young mayor before, we've never had a female mayor before, but that's not what I ran on. I just had a different attitude to the way that I thought we could govern and deliver public service to our residents, and I figured I had a better plan than the others.
Well, that's great. Thank you. And Mayor Suarez, you're not only a young mayor, but you're actually part of a family that's been in politics in Miami. Your father was also the mayor of Miami, and so you're part of, right, the new generation.
Was he?
Right?
Yeah, no.
So how much of running for mayor was because it's in your blood, and how much
Yeah.
was it out of a sense of wanting to flip a page? And
So Tom didn't tell me that I actually had to speak.
is that right?
Because I was just elected 2 months ago. But no, so it's interesting. My father's family, and his sister is in the audience, and my godson is in the audience with her. She works for Georgetown University. And they emigrated to Washington, D.C. He was the 9th of 14. And it was just a very typical immigrant story. We're very successful. And he was, in 1985, the first Cuban mayor in the history of the city of Miami. So I was 8 years old. So I definitely saw politics up front. I had a very sort of firsthand view of what politics in a big city was like. And some of the things I really liked and some of the things I really didn't like. And so growing up, I never really thought that it would be something that I would necessarily do. It wasn't like I grew up thinking I'm going to be mayor of Miami or an elected official or get involved in politics. And I sort of, in a way, I kind of backed into it. I got married, I bought a home, I started paying taxes, was the victim of crime, got involved in my homeowners association. And the commissioner for the area that I represent decided to run for mayor. I was 30 years old and, small business owner, and thought to myself, I don't like to live in regret. And if I'm going to make things better, if I'm going to make my community better, my neighborhood better, I don't want to look back 10, 15, 20 years from now and say, this was an opportunity to serve, and I didn't take it. Mm-hmm. And so I spoke, to my wife, obviously, and my business partner, and who knew what I was getting myself into. And I ran for office, and I worked really, really hard. It was a 2-year campaign, and I got elected by 260 votes. If 131 people would have voted differently, I probably wouldn't be here. And so, was elected commissioner in 2009, city councilman, and served actually 3 terms, was twice reelected without opposition, and then was blessed to be elected mayor just a few months ago by 86% of the vote in the city of Miami, which is really tough because we have a multi-ethnic, multi-party, even though it's a nonpartisan seat, very diverse city, an inclusive city, and so a very highly competitive political environment. And so it's really sort of difficult to explain exactly how you get from barely winning your first election to winning a mayoral election that way. But I feel very blessed to have an opportunity to serve and really learn from these millennial mayors, which is why I came here actually to learn from them.
So we are just off on the tails of a government shutdown, a federal government shutdown, which was thankfully quite short. But some would say that you're mayors at a time when the federal government is literally stalling, it just stalled, but also stalling on many policy matters, such as climate change, immigration, rising economic inequality. In what ways do you see your role as mayors at this moment in our politics as stepping into the void when the federal government drops the ball or can't decide or stalls on some of these matters?
Well, I think, our biggest opportunity as mayors at the local level and your closest representative to government in general, it's our responsibility to take your voices to those who are making those tough decisions. And I think that's what's really nice about the U.S. Conference of Mayors is it's a group that continuously works together to try and advance the cause of cities across the country. And it's funny, we're a nonpartisan organization, and there aren't a whole lot of things that we disagree about. And I think the one thing that has bubbled to the top over the last several years, it's been that whatever it is that you need to do, just get it done. Quit shirking your responsibilities. We have enough trouble at the local level trying to provide the services within the policy framework that's already been set. We can't do your job too. And so I think that's been a real challenge to us. And to communicate to both, and it's not just at the federal level, the state level is the same way. It feels as though we are on this constant defense from those at higher levels of government that think they know best about what is good for our residents. And ultimately, the louder our voice is and the more effective our communication can be with those who are making those decisions, the better served the constituents that we represent.
So Mayor Suarez, back to you just for a minute, because you and I were speaking about Miami, and I'm from the city of Miami, but also the problems of climate. Yeah. And we know that on climate change is a national and an international issue. And right now, a lot of people are looking for leadership on climate change. And Miami is really on the front lines of this issue. Pragmatically, practically, what can you do as mayor on an issue that has such national and international consequences?
So much. I think it's sort of to dovetail off what Lydia was saying, what the mayor was saying, is that we look at the world differently. We look at the world as problem, solution. We don't look at the world through a partisan lens. Mm-hmm. And so some of the phenomenon that we're dealing with, climatic phenomenon that we're dealing with in the city of Miami, are things that we experience. I mean, these are not abstract concepts. When we have Hurricane Irma come through, we had 4 to 8 feet of tidal surge. We have a phenomenon called king tide flooding, where it doesn't even rain, and we have flooding because we have a porous limestone foundation. We have annual rainfall that far exceeds what we have capacity for. So, I mean, we're dealing with these climatic events on a day-to-day basis. Sure. So for us, it's not an abstract concept. It's not a debatable issue. It's not a partisan issue. It's simply, and a lot of what we do as mayors is simply problem solution. Mm-hmm. And so we've been talking about the issue. And we've been planning for the issue, and now we're investing in the issue. Our residents did something very unusual for South Florida. They voted to tax themselves. Very unusual in South Florida. And we passed what's called the Miami Forever Bond. And that is $400 million of money that we are going to be able to use for affordable housing, for cultural facilities and capital and infrastructure, and for resiliency. Sea level rise and climatic resiliency issues. And so, I'm blessed. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good.
Yes.
And so I'm lucky that I get to come in as mayor and usher in this $400 million spending plan that the voters approved. So there's no political backlash for me. We do more than just talk about the issue and plan for the issue. We are now actually dedicating significant resources to the issue.
And so, Mayor Budge, the other thing that came from, or that comes out of our particular political moment is, after the last election, what we see is the urban-rural divide, and you're in a state in which that's very much implicated. And so there are a couple ways that people talk about it, right? One is economically, that much of the GDP, the economic activity, is in large cities, large metropolitan areas. And we're leaving smaller areas and rural areas behind. The other way people talk about it is the political divide, right? Cities as kind of more liberal and rural areas as more conservative. But I wonder, as mayor, what you can do, what you are doing, how you see your position as addressing those divisions in our politics today.
Yeah, it's certainly there, and I think it does account for a lot of what's going on politically. The most salient fact in Indiana is that, and I think this is true in a lot of a lot of states, if you're in the state of Indiana, 2/3 of the people who live in the state, roughly, live in some kind of city or town, some incorporated area. If you look at the members of the legislature, 2/3 of members of the legislature, personally, live outside of any city or town or incorporated area. So the legislature has a different profile than a sort of weighted average of the state would have. And that leads to some real disconnects between state policy and local policy. But I don't think that urban and rural communities have to be pitted against each other. And that's one of the reasons why, among many phenomena that are happening right now among mayors, one of the most compelling is regionalism. So there's a time when mayors thought that all you had to do was pick off an employer or a resident from the next town over and you were winning. And your competition was maybe the nearest county over that you could get some factory when they expanded to decide to go to your community instead of their community. And what we found is that we rise and fall as a region. And rather than trying to all fight each other for our little parochial interests, what we really need to do is make sure that the region as a whole is better off. I had lots of public differences with Governor Pence when he was in Indiana. One thing that administration got right, though, and where credit should be given, is that there was an economic development policy focused on regional cities. And the idea was a big grant was given out, made available to regions if and only if they could demonstrate that they could put together an application. So you had multi-counties areas that had only ever fought each other, competed against each other, learning that they instead had to compete against whole other regions. And the result was, you had Marshall County and Elkhart County and South Bend City folks all coming to the table saying, okay, well, instead of us both putting in an application to have an aquatic center, you do the aquatic center over there, we'll do the river trail up here, you make sure you have a world-class work training center over there, and the whole region's lifted up. Because, at a time when there are obscure minor cities of 5 to 10 million in China, the idea that our big competition is from a nearby rural county just is no longer keeping up with the times.
Right. So speaking of working together, and I want to end our discussion where you begin, I believe, Mayor Lydia, if we can call it, so you're here for the U.S. Conference of Mayors Conference, which is a national network of mayors. There are also international networks of mayors, such as C40, which many of us know. Tom mentioned the Global Parliament of Mayors, and there are other regional networks as well, Eurocities. What do you think, and so you mentioned working together across boundaries within your state, but talk to me about how important it is for mayors to have opportunities like you have this week, both internationally and nationally, to work together, and what that can do, what collaborating with other mayors, how that can help you at home.
I think one of the things that we say as mayors, and you'll figure this out if you haven't already, I think they teach it like tomorrow. In the morning at the new mayor meeting. But mayors are really good at sharing passionately and stealing shamelessly. And so we, what's good in South Bend that we see is really exciting, we may want to try in Findlay. What's happening down in Miami, besides the weather. I mean, I'd love to have the sunshine and the 90-degree days all the time. But I guess what I'm saying is that we like to share ideas, and there is no patent on amazing ideas, and that isn't just exclusive to mayors of the United States. Mm-hmm. And I've spent a lot of time in Japan. There is a very special relationship between the city of Findlay and the country of Japan, a lot of it born out of our automotive economic ties, but we've also had some cultural exchange, some educational exchange as well. And the one thing that has been great is just the opportunity to learn from mayors in Japan about how they just manage things like natural disasters. The last time I was in Japan, towards the end of October, beginning of November, they were in the middle of a tsunami. And the mayor there was handling things a lot differently than maybe the way that we would, and a lot of it had to do with their information for emergency management came from the state. They weren't necessarily responsible at the city level. They were waiting to respond as the state told them to do accordingly, or their prefectures. So I think there's just a lot of opportunity there to learn, and I think what's unique about millennials is we're not afraid to ask questions. There's no problem, there's no qualms in us saying, well, why do you do that? And I think it's just this constant search for knowledge and how do we make ourselves better? And I think we kind of get pigeonholed as being, super lazy, and that, we're not productive, and I don't know, pick another, few negative things. I just don't see that.
Clearly none of that's true.
No, of course not. But I just think that, we're not afraid to ask questions. We're constantly in a pursuit of more knowledge, and we're perfectly fine with sharing what works and what doesn't work. There's no reason for someone to spin their wheels on something that maybe isn't necessarily ideal. So whether you do that through the U.S. Conference of Mayors, whether you do that through an international organization, I think what you find is that the world is really a small place when you get out and about.
Indeed. So we're going to open it up to questions from the audience now. And I believe we have a microphone floating around. Correct. So let's start back here. The question back here. Great.
Good evening. Thank you again, all three of you, for coming out to take an opportunity to speak with us. I'm Jonathan Bush, and I'm an alumni of the School of Continuing Studies in Urban and Regional Planning. I actually have two questions. My first question goes to the mayor of Miami. Is that Mayor Suarez? Is that correct? I heard you mention about the Miami Forever Bond, and being a mayor, and of course a big thing in Miami now is the resiliency. Being a mayor of Miami and having a governor who is well known for his views on climate change, how do you manage to lead with leadership that necessarily doesn't agree with your views? That's my first question. And my second question is to the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. And you mentioned that it was the home of Studebaker, the car, I believe. So my main question to you would be, so many U.S. cities have grappled with reinvigorating themselves after their manufacturing, their textile base, or automotive base has left. How has South Bend, Indiana managed, or what steps or what strides have been taken to overcome those things? Thank you.
So we do it by not taking a partisan approach to solving the problem. We do it by, in part, not really relying on others to solve our problems for us, or not really, it's sort of icing on the cake if we get help from other governments. Ironically and interestingly and sort of surprisingly, part of how we're planning to spend the resiliency dollars that we're going to receive from the bond is based on a stormwater master plan update to take into account for sea level rise. And the money that we received to conduct that study, to conduct that master plan sort of improvement or update, was actually received from a Republican-controlled state legislature. So that's very, very sort of unexpected, if you will. We certainly would have spent the money had we had to, because it doesn't make sense to spend $200 million, without spending $1.5 million to plan for how you're going to spend it. So certainly, if we had to come out of pocket ourselves to spend, to plan properly for the expenditure of multiple hundreds of millions of dollars, we would have done it. But it's nice to have the support of the state, particularly given the fact that it's not something that you often hear is in the wheelhouse of a Republican-controlled legislature. But I think part of what I've tried to do is obviously and of course, some of the things that we're experiencing, we are actually experiencing them. So that's part of the issue. But the second part of the issue is the economics. I mean, when you start looking at this as an economic issue, and when you look at how much sales tax the city of Miami generates for the state, when you start looking at the fact that if an insurance company decides that they don't want to insure on properties in the city of Miami, the catastrophic economic effect that would have on South Florida would trickle to and would impact incredibly the state budget, which is, by the way, $83 billion. So when they think about the percentage of their budget that is generated from city sales tax, which is one of the largest cities in the state of Florida, and you think about the effect of not planning for this reality, very quickly, no matter what party you're from, you can see that it can have a significant, disastrous economic impact.
I could just
Yeah, sure.
tag on to that real quick, and regardless of whether you're in a, maybe a liberal, more leaning or Democrat-controlled city, or a conservative Republican, more leaning controlled city, I think the fact is that mayors make a business case for these decisions, and you hit it right on the head. There is a business case to be made, and it's hard to argue for the dollars that are impacted, either positive or negatively, when you don't address something like the issue that Miami is having to deal with.
So for us, the key, we'll say two things that sound a little bit contradictory. One of them is we had to overcome nostalgia and realize things are never going to be the same. And the other thing we had to do is recognize that anything we did in the future had to be true to the strengths that we had in the past. So the overcoming nostalgia part was, it was 50 years after Studebaker collapsed, took 20,000 jobs with it overnight, which, by the way, is one of the reasons we have a slightly nuanced view of things like the mayors racing to get Amazon in their community. More than 20,000 jobs overnight, right? And so 50 years later, people were still saying, we got to get some version of Studebaker back. We got to get back to that somehow. And my job in the campaign was to say, that's not going to happen. Nothing resembling Studebaker is going to come back. And that's okay. Now, you got to have a plan for the that's okay part, right?
Yeah, right.
But you don't need to have too much of a plan. And what I mean by that is I came in and people were saying, okay, Mayor, especially got run on economic development in a lot of ways. So what's it going to be? Are we going to be a biotech city? Are we going to pattern ourselves after the research triangle? Or are we going to be more like Silicon Valley? And it's very tempting to try to invent a cluster or set up a new economy. And the answer was, I don't know. I don't know like where the best energy in the private sector is going to be in our city. I just know that we got to lay the foundations for it. One of the things that wound up happening, no mayor would have ever thought this up. It turns out that the internet is a physical thing. We don't think of it that way, but the internet runs through, anytime you like something on Facebook, something on a computer somewhere has to move physically, right? So how does that all work? Well, you got data centers and you've got fiber connecting them. When it comes to fiber, that had to go somewhere. It mostly went along the old highway and railway conduit, which is laid out across the industrial Midwest because, of course, it was there to move things around. So we have an incredible amount of fiber going through our community. The other thing you need is the data centers, which are very power hungry, right? And very hard to cool off these computers. So what you need there is cheap power, cold weather, and a lot of fiber. That's fantastic for South Bend. And on the very acreage where the Studebaker factories used to stand, we have data centers now cropping up, making use of these substations that were just sitting there for years with nothing left to power. And so it's it's an industry that didn't exist when Studebaker was in business. But it's only there because it is something that builds on what we've already got. And my message has always been that you have to innovate, you have to make it new, but you don't have to make it up. You don't have to pull these things out of whole cloth. You have to find something that's true to the strengths that are already in your community. And by the way, recognize also that there's plenty of high-tech manufacturing going on that's very exciting. But we're employing people, 200 at a time across 100 firms. That's how you get your 20,000. Not necessarily one giant headquarters of 20,000 people, especially because manufacturing is less labor-intensive than ever. And just the last point I would make is that you also have to not be afraid of the future, not be afraid of being part of the world, because you can find stories of workers. Here's one for you. The company that makes Hummers is in South Bend, and they had enough capacity to do contract assembly with some kind of excess facility that they had. So they got a 3-year contract, it just wrapped up, to make R-Class, which is a Mercedes. And if you've never seen R-Class for sale, that's because it's only sold in China. So you got American union auto workers making German cars going to Chinese customers. It's a great example of how workers have a role besides that of victim in a globalized, modernized economy. And we have to tell more of those stories so that people can resist the temptation to just, and the political temptation, obviously, to promise people that you can just turn back the clock.
Wait for the mic, yeah.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Amanda McDonald. I'm an MBA MPP student and former resident of South Bend. I want to say you've been doing a great job, and I think we're all very proud of you. I have a question for you. You mentioned the homeless problem in South Bend, and I'm just wondering maybe what solution that you've tried as your time in mayor, or something that's coming up that you're most excited about, or something that's worked best?
Yeah, so no mayor that I've met can claim to have totally figured out the issue of homelessness, but there are some things that we know work better than others. In South Bend, the overall number of people who are homeless seems to be going down, but the visibility of the problem is going up, partly because of an encampment that formed in a very visible place. In fact, it's right by this, one of the gleaming examples of the new economy, which is the Studebaker factory turning into a data center, is also right next to a bridge where we got, in the summertime, as many as 30 people on it, which for us is a lot in one place. What we know is, first of all, there is a level of need in terms of mental health and substance abuse issues that if you can't deal with that, you're never going to deal with this issue. Sometimes there's a kind of a temptation to believe it's about housing. It's sort of about housing, but it's mostly not. It's not a question of how many houses are in the city, for sure. In fact, when I took office, we had too many houses. We had to deal with 1,000 vacant and abandoned houses. We know that permanent supportive housing helps. So there was an idea before that what you need to do is you need to straighten people out, sober them up, and then you get them into the program and you get them into housing, right? Well, the reality is there are just some people who you just need to get them indoors somehow. That's housing first, right? Then you see if you can figure out some of the other stuff. So what we've tried to do is increase the number of permanent supportive housing beds, which can be a tough sell because they're expensive. But when you compare that to the level of pressure that these folks can put on the system as extreme repeat users of emergency rooms or other facilities, I think it's a no-brainer. And then we also try to have what I'm most excited about is that in this coming year, we'll be able to build a gateway center that will connect people up. As a housing center, it shouldn't house them for long, maybe up to 6 weeks, something like that. But it gets them through the door, recognizing these are people who are unwilling or unable to use the mainstream homeless center services, but connects them up to the resources, either routing them into that supportive housing or getting them on a path to get some of those issues dealt with for good. Again, it's tricky, it's thorny, nobody's really completely figured it out. But we're a lot smarter about these issues than we were 10 or 20 years ago. And we have to have honest conversations and make tough choices too, because I've been in the position of personally going down under a bridge, talking to a homeless person saying, it's snowing, I got a bed for you in a warming center, let me carry your things and go with you, and they say no. And so there's this moral question that I sincerely don't know how to answer, which is there a right to be homeless? And can you force somebody indoors? And I don't think you can force somebody indoors, but if you accept that you can't, then there's a question of where people are supposed to go. And when you're the mayor, even impossible questions, especially impossible questions, are asked of you. And you have to have some kind of an answer, even if there's no clear solution.
Okay, let's get some more questions there. Yes, you had your hand up. And then.
Hi, I'm Joseph Mujita. I'm a freshman here at the college in Georgetown. Us millennials saw a major phenomenon in 2017 with the rise of the Me Too movement and the rise of empowerment for women who stood up against an oppressive system of sexual assault and sexual harassment that has not been spoken out of for some time. My question is, without any major federal, state, or local legislation that has been passed in the wake of the Me Too movement, how can we be certain that time is truly up for this type of harassment and assault? Thank you.
Anybody want to take that?
Well, I can. I think what you do is just continue the conversation. I think that's been, sunshine is a great disinfectant. Mm-hmm. And I think the more we communicate that this happens and it's unacceptable, and that there is, little tolerance, if any, for it, then maybe perhaps someday we won't have those stories. But this is something that hasn't been going on just for the last 20 years. I mean, it's been going on for hundreds of years. And so it's not going to be, we haven't gotten to this point overnight, so we're not going to change it overnight, but I definitely see in the very short term, there's going to be a lot of change, and it'll all be for the better. And hopefully we can get to a point in our society where we treat people fairly with compassion and don't take advantage of their weaknesses, or perceived or otherwise. And I don't know that there's any piece of federal, state, or local legislation that's going to make people treat others with respect. But the more that we become examples of how to interact with human beings, the better I think we'll all be.
And I might say that the rise of women running, or the number of women running for mayors and becoming mayors, is part of the solution.
Thank you. My name is Carlos Pazmino. I'm also seeking my master's in regional urban planning. Actually, I want to piggyback off of my colleague from South Bend and her question about homelessness, but my focus is more on gentrification. A big problem that many growing cities and also smaller cities have when they improve economically is that their new economy oftentimes alienates members of the already living community of those cities. What are some proactive, not just promises, but some proactive approaches you've taken to make sure that the economy that you're building your cities is an inclusive economy? And as a second question, what new economic incentives have you found in fighting climate change? I think that it's more centered on Miami too, but just generally speaking.
Yeah, let me address the first question, because gentrification is a real problem nationally, but certainly in the city of Miami, it's very acute. We've grown, and I always like to say we're a victim of our own success. So we've grown 37% in the last 3 years in our tax base. That's a 12% annualized growth approximately for 3 consecutive years, 52% over the last 5 years. Double-digit growth for 5 years. I mean, that's astronomical. And we're a receptacle for investment, worldwide investment. So we have a finite asset, which is our land, which abuts a variety of different boundaries. And we have capital from all over the world competing for that finite asset. So in Miami, in downtown, for example, on the river, there is a project that's being built right now, done with Aston Martin, the sort of high-end car manufacturer, who's actually developing a rent or a condominium. Interestingly, they're diversifying there, and the dirt, the land, sold for an acre, sold for $125 million. So when you have land basis that's that high, you know you're not building affordable housing. It's just the numbers just don't work. So what I've done as a commissioner, as a legislator, is I've done a variety of things: entitlements, of incentives in terms of impact fee deferrals and permit fee deferrals and permit fee waivers based on the kind of housing that we're trying to incentivize. We've done mixed income, double density pieces of legislation, small building parking exemption pieces of, we've done everything as progressive as you can do from an entitlement perspective as a land planner. I think you can appreciate that, to try to move the needle. We're at a point where, again, the scarcity of our land, the limitation of resources, we just bonded out, again, something almost unheard of in Miami. We voted to self-tax ourselves to the tune of $100 million. We have what's called community redevelopment agencies in Miami, which are what they call TIF entities, tax increment financing entities. And we are in the process of potentially extending 2 of them, which could produce anywhere from, on the low end, $300 million, on the high end, $1.2 billion in resources for affordable housing. But we need to combine that with underutilized public assets and public land. So we have about, in cooperation with Miami-Dade County, which is separate from the city of Miami, we're the largest of 34 municipalities in Dade County. We need to cooperate with governments that sort of we interact with to leverage their resources in a way that better utilizes the property that they have. They have zero basis land, free land essentially. And if we can combine that with anywhere from 250, 300 million to $1.2 billion, you're talking about tens of thousands of units of affordable housing. that's part of it. The other part of it is, as you properly identified in the question, we have a lot of people that are that have been City of Miami residents for a long time, and that we have again this incredible history, 121-year history of diverse neighborhoods, and they're being cannibalized. And so, part of it is not just building more units and trying to get units to be more affordable, but a part of it is trying to empower the people that are already living there to stay there. And that's done through allowing them to rebuild their homes. In some cases, if the homes are not up to, for example, hurricane standards, because we have these violent storms, taking them down and building them, sometimes building them in a fashion that is respectful of the historic character of the homes. So there's sort of new history. And so there's a variety of different tools that we're using, but it's a very real problem in the city of Miami.
Okay, last question.
I'll be very quick.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, okay. Thank
Here's
you.
the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Enash, International Urban Alliance. I had two questions. One was answered beautifully about regionalism. The second is there are scholars like Peter Calthorpe, Bruce Katz, and international guys who say there's a lack of generalists and problem solvers, formally educated, people who can look at things in urban and metropolitan areas in terms of holistics, in terms of creativity, connecting things. Do you need such a thing for various levels of leadership?
I think that's what mayors are.
Yeah.
You just described a mayor.
Yeah.
And my dad is an engineer who went to law school and got a master's in public policy. So he was a generalist. And I've learned from him, as a generalist. But again, we live in a world of problem solution. So you absolutely have to be a generalist.
What do you think, Mayor Hallecky?
I love to say that my liberal arts education has served me quite well. And while I majored in political science and have the theory side figured out, I think being a mayor requires you to be pragmatic. I think millennials, which I'm kind of jazzed up about having that title now. I'm gonna take it home with me. I'm taking it home. But I think millennials are, uniquely positioned to be able to say that's what works. And I think the more varied our experiences, the better the product. And it's worked for me. But yeah, you have to know a little bit about a lot. And I think there's a lot of breadth. On occasion, we get to depth. Like I deal with the Army Corps of Engineers a lot, so I know a lot about that. But I don't have the time or the bandwidth to handle a lot. So yeah, I guess just in that sense, we are all generalists.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. First, broadly, you kind of get me on my soapbox about academia and what's going on in the academy. But I started out in history and literature, which is one of the academic fields that I think it's starting to bend back a little bit. But the hyper specialization is unbelievable, right? If you want to get a tenure track job, you got to be the authority who wrote the only PhD thesis ever on, Danish botany puns in Joyce or something like so tiny, right? And it makes it really hard to get out from that. But as the other mayor said, something about being mayor forces you beautifully to have to contemplate the relationship between the general and the particular. Because one minute you're sitting with your staff, you're saying, okay, I don't know, you're dealing with some issue that makes you into utilitarian, right? Like we can either raise fees on everybody by a little bit, or we can have a few people really inconvenienced by having to have their trash taken out to the front instead of the back or something. You're really literally deciding whether to make a few people better off or a lot of people a little bit worse off. And you think about it philosophically, but unlike, let's say, a U.S. senator, the next morning, somebody impacted by that will find you. You're at the grocery just trying to get some peanut butter and beer and toilet paper, and they're like, "Why did you do this?" And you got to have a good answer. And so you're always kind of zooming in and back out. on one hand, you have to touch every field. And the great thing that I love about a city of our scale, we're just over 100,000, is that we touch everything. We're just big enough that we experience complexity. And so we're a great pilot market or beta city. For example, Lime Bike, if anybody's used that. We were actually the largest deployment of Lime Bike until Seattle caught up to us, this dockless bike sharing system. Because we were just big enough that if it succeeded there, it mattered. But we were small enough you could get a hold of the mayor and ask to do a pilot project, right? And so there's this range, and yet at the end of the day, on the acute issues, you have to get the kind of depth to be able to solve the problem. And I would like to believe that's why, especially the many people here who are studying urban affairs, will have an opportunity to do that. You're doing applied philosophy. You're thinking about some of the biggest questions there are, especially in policy. And then you're thinking about them at a level where you're literally face to face with the people who are impacted with them all the time. And I would argue that if we could somehow translate that immediacy and reality, because there's no alternative facts in local government. The pothole got filled or it didn't, right? If we can translate that up to state and national politics, we all might be a little better off for it.
That's great. Great questions, guys. Thank you. So I'm going to give it to my colleague in just a minute, but I do want to thank all of you, right? Mayor Buttigieg, Mayor Mahalik, and Mayor Suarez. It's been so inspiring to have you here. Thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for taking our questions, and thank you for arriving early to do this. Yeah. So thank you. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to close it out here. My name is Uwe Brandis. I'm professor of practice and the faculty director of the Urban and Regional Planning Program. I'm also, I've got the great honor and privilege of helping to create this new dialogue at the university that we're calling the Georgetown Global Cities Initiative. This is the first formal event that we've held, and we're just greatly privileged to have you help us kick us off. I, of course, want to thank Mo and the entire team at the Institute of Politics for helping us along here. We've had a great partnership in the past. And what we see happening at the university is many, many people, faculty and students, interested in these questions of place-based and community-based dialogues. We as a university, of course, have many people interested in these issues globally. But we also have great energy around our anchor institution role here in Washington, D.C. This conversation kind of ties it all together. It's very interdisciplinary. It involves all schools and departments across the university. And it's a time of new beginnings and building out a network to further advance that. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight. In the spirit of building out these networks and growing the number of people who are interested in this, we have a reception for everyone, and we look forward to being in touch with you as the initiative matures and is developed further. Thank you very much.